Hello, you guys, and thank you so much for tuning into my channel. So, I get asked this question like a lot about Cape Town and my experiences within Cape Town. So, the most frequent question that I get asked is Cape Town racist? And I kind of feel like that question is so loaded. A lot of people who ask me that question want me to dispel any ideas and myths and opinions they may or may not have had of Cape Town, or B, to validate their fears. So before I say anything on that topic, I just want to put it out there that, these are only my experiences. They're not necessarily everybody else's experience. You know what I mean? And it's also really important to understand that Cape Town is such a big city with millions and millions of people. Not everybody thinks the same. Not everybody feels the same. And not everybody has the same experience. So I can only share what I've been through. And in my personal experience, yes, we definitely could do a lot better when it comes to racism. South Africa, obviously, we lived under the apartheid regime for, I think, about 45 years. My math may be off. I think my math is bad. But from the year 1945 until the year 1994. And that meant that the movement of Black people in this country was restricted, and we essentially lived like illegal immigrants in our own country. It meant that if you were Black, or if you were mixed race, or if you were Asian, or if you were Caucasian, the type of school you went to was influenced by your race. The type of neighborhood that you went to, your access to employment, what you could study at school. It was all basically decided by the government. And if you did happen to be Black, it meant that you couldn't go to the same school as someone who was mixed. You couldn't live in the same neighborhood as somebody who was mixed. And for white people, on the other hand, I feel like it brainwashed a lot of white people that went through the South African school system. White people who may not necessarily have come from racist families, if they went through the South African school system during apartheid South Africa, they would have definitely been taught racism. They would have definitely been taught, to see whiteness as being superior and therefore better, and Blackness as being inferior. Now, I think now, living in South Africa so many years after apartheid, we are still dealing with the ramifications of what the apartheid system has done to our nation. And not that I'm a pessimist or anything, but I really feel like we're only ever going to get over apartheid or racism once an entire generation has grown up and reached their 40s and 50s in an integrated society. For my generation, for people in their late 20s, early 30s, we were born to parents that were victimized by apartheid. Whether they were white, whether they were Black, whether they were mixed, they were all essentially victimized by apartheid to some degree. You know what I mean? And I know that might sound like an insensitive statement, because obviously Black people experienced far worse than anybody else in this country with regards to apartheid. But I feel like white people were also victimized to some degree, because they were brainwashed into living with hatred. They were brainwashed into living with fear. And whether you are the person who hates, or whether you're the person who is hated on, you are still a victim to some degree. But I'm not going to get too deep into that. My experience at Cape Town, so I worked for this one company, and I'm obviously never going to say the company's name, but I worked for about, I think, 3.5 years in this company. And not to toot my own horn, but I was one of the best agents that they had. My KPIs were, I was right at the top. I was always in the top 5 in terms of my key performance indicators. My attendance was excellent in the beginning of me working there. In many ways, I really was the ideal employee. And what I found was my white counterparts and my mixed race counterparts would come and pass. Like their progression in the company seemed to be much faster, much smoother than their black counterparts. And it just seemed like working there that the higher up you moved in management, the more white and the more male it became. There was literally one department, I think that was like 87% white male. You know what I mean? So the higher up you moved, the more male it became and the more white it became. And, there's so many of my friends who were very, very competent in the beginning who would apply for certain positions and who would get declined. I remember my one friend, she applied for this job, and when she got it, a lot of people were saying it was because of affirmative action. Let me just put it out there. The company that I worked for did not have any type of affirmative action. At the top of management, right at the top of management, it was either that you were a Caucasian South African or you were a European, a Caucasian European. It was one of the two. It was one of the two, with very few exceptions. And I remember a lot of us became embittered because we started to realize after, a year and a half that, wow, I'm not going to get anywhere in this company. And to make the situation worse, and this was one of the reasons that I left that company, in my company, obviously it's an international company, and we have different departments that speak different languages like German, French, so on and so forth. In my team, there were only 3 black girls. It was me, and I'm not going to say my 2 other friends' names, but we were basically told that we were no longer allowed to speak our native language. We weren't allowed to speak Xhosa on the premises, whether it was during our break times, whether it was us just having a private conversation. But we were essentially told that, if you speak your native language, there is going to be some type of punishment for that. You're going to receive a warning. And disciplinary action is going to be taken against you if you speak your native language. And, I had an issue with this because I felt like, firstly, if something like that is going to be implemented in the company, it kind of needs to be across the board. You can't only say to the black people that speak Xhosa that they're not allowed to speak their language. People who speak Afrikaans, the same rules should apply to them. People that were in the Dutch Nordic department who spoke Dutch or Finnish or Swedish, the same rules should apply to them. And in addition to that, I kind of felt like, fine, if I'm not allowed to speak my language, which, by the way, is an official language in South Africa, like it's low-key official, you can't then ask me to perform part of my job function in another language that I do not understand. Let me give you an example. If I received an email that was in German or Greek, I had to translate it and then respond to the person and try to use Google Translate. And if anyone's ever used Google Translate, you know it's not correct. And, communicate with this customer. So I just felt like it was a double slap in the face. And when we complained about this, of course we were seen as the troublemakers. And I remember in this one meeting we had, our manager basically saying, well, you guys speaking your language is disruptive on the floor, so we'd appreciate if you didn't. Long story short, I ended up leaving that company because I felt that I would never get ahead in that company. I was damned in that company. I was never, ever going to get ahead. And they were going to continue to try and bully me until they bullied me out of the company. So I just, I took it upon myself. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to, I fought as much as I could, but I was like, I'm not going to make myself sick over this. If they do not want me here, I'm going to leave. And now I feel like that's kind of like the message that Cape Town has a lot of the time, is that you almost feel like you're not wanted. And funny thing is, after I left that company, despite the fact that I had one of the highest key performance indicators, everybody was quick to blame me. Everyone who wasn't a black person was quick to blame me. A lot of people were like, oh, she just wanted to make it a racial thing. She wasn't performing this, that, and the other. And I'm kind of like, well, if you come at me in a racial way, how else am I supposed to take it? So in Cape Town, like I've really experienced racism at every level. Even when you go out to like nightclubs, there are certain nightclubs, and I'm not going to say their names, but there is one nightclub in Long Street particular that has black quota, meaning there's a certain number of black people, especially when it's a busy night, that they're going to take. And because they don't want to reach capacity, they would rather, I don't know, reserve the space for white people. And everybody knows, like, I mean, I've had friends who say this all the time that, you know, if you're going to go to certain nightclubs, you're best to go with your white friends because that's your way in, you know what I mean? But look, it is what it is. And I'm the type of person who thinks, you know, if my money's not good enough for you, I'll go somewhere where my money is good enough for me. And you definitely see racism amplified in the LGBT community. And what I mean by that, what I mean that it's amplified, it's almost as though because certain Caucasian people, and not everyone, but certain white people who are gay, lesbian, or trans, or intersex, or bisexual, or genderqueer, or demisexual, or pansexual, because they have now become part of the other, because they've now become part of the counterculture, they cling on as hard as they can to any bit of privilege that they have. And in Cape Town, they cling on to their whiteness for dear life. They literally do. So when you go to the LGBT clubs, I think there aren't that many in Cape Town, but you'll see one or two that are like predominantly, almost entirely white, where the bartenders are either all Caucasian and there'll be one or two mixed bartenders, but it'll be pretty much just it'll be clear when you walk in that this is a space for white people. It'll be very, very, very white. And then there's the other LGBT club, which is almost entirely black, And when you're a black person going into a white club, it does take some time before people warm up to you. I mean, when I started going to, and it's not only the LGBT clubs, it happens pretty much everywhere. But when you're standing at the bar, you are going to be the last person to get served. You literally are going to be the last person to get served. And you know, it's just one of those things, you know, you would hope and pray that, you know, people would not behave in that way, but in Cape Town people do. In Cape Town people do. Some people do, not everyone. So, yeah, no, racism is still very, very rife. And I mean, I've had experiences. I remember this one time in December. So, if anyone is new to this channel, I am obviously a trans woman. I'm a woman of trans experience. I have this one friend, Cody, and me and Cody are like super, super close. She's like legit one of my best friends, like ever. And she had this like flatmate, so this blonde, blue-eyed Caucasian girl who, by the way, is not even from Cape Town, So we're not going to blame Cape Town for her behavior. So I had interacted with her and I'd met her, but when I met her, her and Cody had kind of fallen out. So it was kind of weird between them. But I met her and she seemed friendly-ish. Like, she seemed okay. She seemed friendly until she wasn't. And the funny thing is, one thing I've noticed with a lot of white South Africans, especially the ones from Cape Town and Pretoria and Bloemfontein and Potchefstroom, especially those ones, and Vereniging, especially especially those ones. It's almost as though they will be nice to you, and the minute you act up, the minute you do something to piss them off, they're going to remind you that you're a black person. Case in point, this girl, we're going to call her Shaznay. Shaznay was going to have her parents come over and sleep in her room, and her brother was going to sleep in the lounge of their apartment. Now, the apartment is under Cody's mom. So basically, Cody's mom is leasing the place out to the one room to Shaznay, and the other room is Cody, obviously. So Shaznay's parents are there, and her brother is there. Now, me and Cody, we go out, we have an awesome time, and then we were going to crash at some guy's place. Now, Cody obviously wanted to get a little bit, sentimental and romantic. She wanted to get in the mood with this guy that she was with. And she didn't want me crashing at the guy's place. So she gave me the keys to her apartment, and she was like, okay, here are the keys. Just sleep in my room, and just make sure that you're not loud because you're going to disturb Shaznay's parents. So she gives me the code. She gives me the keys. So I Uber to Cody's place. I get in through the security gate because obviously I know the code and I've been there a million times. I get to the door, and me being ditzy, because I'm so used to when I get to Cody's place, I knock on the door, not realizing I have the keys. And by doing that, I wake up Shaznay's parents. And the dad opens the door and sort of looks at me, and he's like, can I help you? And I'm like, oh, sorry, I have the keys. I'm Cody's friend. As I'm rummaging through my bag, getting the keys, Shaznay's dad takes the key that he had and puts it in the lock. Now, if you put the key in the lock, it means that me on the outside, if I put my key, I won't be able to open. Now, I'm drunk, and I put my key in, and the key's not going in, and I'm like, what is going on? So as I'm busy doing this, the security guard comes. A security guard who has met me, by the way, who I've had many conversations with. Comes up aggressively, and he's all like, what's going on here? What's going on here? And I'm like, oh, hey. Oh, no, it's just me and Christabel. I'm just looking for the key. Sorry I'm making so much noise. It's that and the other. So the key's not working. So I'm like, what's going on? So I take out the other key in my bag, and obviously the other key's not going to work either because it's my house key. Both keys are not working. And at this point, the dad and the security guard lose it, and they're like, no, you need to get out of here. You don't belong here. And it was just a weird night. We get into an altercation, basically, because they're kind of yelling at me. They're both yelling at me. So I yell at them, and I'm like, then call Shaznay. She needs to open for me because she knows me. They're like, no, you need to get the fuck out, this, that, and the other. The security guard grabs me by my arm and is like dragging me and pulling me, and I'm like being pulled across the room. And oh my god, it was such a mess. And basically picks me up and throws me out of the building. It was so sad. It was so sad. So they throw me out, and this is a security guard who knows me. This is somebody who knows me. Throw me out, and then I call Cody, hysterical, like crying, because I feel like I've just been assaulted. I hadn't been assaulted, but the way he was pulling me across the floor, obviously I incurred injuries. And him throwing me out like that, obviously I hit the ground and I was like bruised and whatever. So I literally, at that moment, I felt like I had been assaulted by somebody that I knew. And then I go back to Cody. I'm like upset and hysterical. Cody obviously contacts her mom. And listen to Shaznay. Listen to Shaznay. Shaznay complains to the mother, to Cody's mother, and says that fucking black drug addicted transvestite disturbed my parents and this, that, and the other. And I'm just kind of like, what does my race? Number one, I'm not drug addicted. Number two, I'm not a transvestite. But number three is what I was really interested in. What did my race have to do with anything? What did me being Black, like, why was that even featured? Why was that even featured? And it was featured because sometimes, not everyone, but sometimes some Caucasian people, some white people feel that when they're fighting with you, they want to bring up the fact that you are Black. And not only did she want to bring up the fact that I was Black, she threw in my gender expression, and she was like, oh, she's probably on drugs, that's why she's acting the fool. And I just remember being so upset by that. I remember being so upset by that because essentially that kind of is how Cape Town has always viewed me, as a quote unquote Black transvestite, and has white Cape Town has tried to other me as much as it possibly can. And it's very frustrating. It really, really is very frustrating. Now, the people that I date, my partners have predominantly been Caucasian. My partners have predominantly been Caucasian, but they've been white people from other countries, like from Sweden, from Italy, from England, and of course Australia. And I've even hooked up with some white South African guys. But every time I would go on a date with like a white guy who was obviously foreign, because a lot of a lot of white people in Cape Town, it's not their preference to date Black people. We'll just leave it at that. But a lot of the white guys that I would date were almost shocked at the number of stares we would get. It would always come up. People would always ask me, they'd always be like, is it like uncommon for Black people and white people to be together in this country? And I'd always have to explain that, we are so new into this democracy. We are so new into integration. Yes, 20 plus years have passed, but you need to understand an entire generation that still is in power grew up under systematic racism, and they were essentially brainwashed into believing that anything interracial, especially interracial relationships, are fundamentally immoral. You know what I mean? And people stick within their own groups, like Black people stick within their own groups, mixed people stick within their own group, so do Asians and so do white people. So when you start to see people go against the social order, as you will, it's not disheartening, but it's a little bit shocking for some people. Now, I have to sort of put it out there that in as much as me and my partners have always gotten stared at, not all of the stares have been bad. Some people, have smiled at us or shown, like that they really are rooting for us. You know what I mean? That they're really happy to see that the previous structures are slowly breaking away. And I think at the core, South Africans do want to live in racial harmony. None of us are enjoying this racial war. And I feel like we've all become victims. White people are victims in that they live in fear. They live in fear of a host of things, and they feel alienated in the country of their birth, which by and large is wrong. Like, I do believe that white people feeling alienated in their country of birth is essentially and fundamentally wrong. But at the same time, Black people feel alienated in certain spaces. Black people feel like they are being continually victimized. You know what I mean? And I mean, it got to a point where when I would go out on dates with white guys, I no longer expect the waitress or the waiter to give me any type of attention. Like, I've literally had white waitresses turn their back towards me and speak only to the white guy. sitting on the table. So I've had that. I've seen my fair share of that. But like at the end of the day, like regardless of how other people feel, I still believe in humanity. I still believe that for every one racist you meet, there are 10 people that are loving and amazing, and not everybody feels the same way. So just because I've had a couple of negative experiences in the workplace, you know, getting apartments, at shops, at restaurants, you know, in clubs with friends. Just because I've had my fair share of racist experiences, I don't paint every white person with the same brush and thinking that, oh, just because I've met one or two or three bad ones, the whole lot is rotten. I think, you know, I understand that people are complicated and this country is complicated and Cape Town is very, very complicated. And for all of its problems, I absolutely love Cape Town. I think it's such a beautiful city. And I feel like we're still going through growing pains and we are going to get better. We're going to get better as a country. We're going to get better as a nation. We're going to get better as a people. And yeah, a lot of people are immigrating because of the issues in South Africa. And I'm just kind of like, let them go and love them as they leave. And for the ones that stay, let's help build this country. Let's help make it what we need it to be. You know what I mean? And South Africa, this city, this country, it belongs to all of us. It belongs to Black people. It belongs to white people. It belongs to mixed people. And it belongs to Asian people. We are all a part of this, and we are all intrinsically connected to each other. You know what I mean? So, really, to hate another person because of their race is essentially to hate yourself, because we are connected. We are one. We are part of one collective mind. And believe me when I say this, things are going to get better. And you know, on my channel, you know, I've been very critical of the LGBT, and I've spoken of racism and colorism and all of that. But I will say this, though. A lot of people within the LGBT, although there's a lot more racism there than in other spaces, there's also a lot more love and there's also a lot more acceptance. So the essence of this message is, yeah, things can be bad, but it's going to get better. I promise. I love you. I thank you. And thank you so much if you made it all the way to the end of this long, long, long ass video. Y'all know how I like to rant. Okay, click the like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Bye.